The Phoenix, from Bulfinch's Mythology. Ovid tells the story of the phoenix as follows. Most beings spring from other individuals, but there is a certain kind which reproduces itself. The Assyrians call it the phoenix. It does not live on fruit or flowers, but on frankincense and odoriferous gums. When it has lived 500 years, it builds itself a nest in the branches of an oak, or on the top of a palm tree. In this it collects cinnamon and spikenard and myrrh, and of these materials builds a pile on which it deposits itself, and dying, breathes out its last breath amidst odors. From the body of the parent bird, a young phoenix issues forth, destined to live as long a life as its predecessor. When this has grown up and gained sufficient strength, it lifts its nest from the tree, its own cradle and its parents' sepulchre, and carries it to the city of Heliopolis in Egypt, and deposits it in the temple of the sun. Such is the account given by a poet. Now let us see that of a philosophic historian. Tacitus says, in the consulship of Paulus Fabius, A.D. 34, the miraculous bird known to the world by the name of the phoenix, after disappearing for a series of ages, revisited Egypt. It was attended in its flight by a group of various birds, all attracted by the novelty and gazing with wonder at so beautiful an appearance. He then gives an account of the bird, not varying materially from the preceding, but adding some details. The first care of the young bird, as soon as fledged and able to trust his wings, is to perform the obsequies of his father. But this duty is not undertaken rashly. He collects a quantity of myrrh, and to try his strength makes frequent excursions with a load on his back. When he has gained sufficient confidence in his own vigor, he takes up the body of his father, and flies with it to the altar of the sun, where he leaves it to be consumed in flames of fragrance. Other writers added a few particulars. The myrrh is compacted in the form of an egg, in which the dead phoenix is enclosed. From the mouldering flesh of the dead bird, a worm springs, and this worm, when grown large, is transformed into a bird. Herodotus describes the bird, though he says, I have not seen it myself, except in a picture. Part of his plumage is gold-colored, and part crimson, and he is for the most part very much like an eagle in outline and bulk. The first writer who disclaimed a belief in the existence of the phoenix was Sir Thomas Browne, in his Vulgar Errors, published in 1646. He was replied to a few years later by Alexander Ross, who said, in answer to the objection of the phoenix so seldom making his appearance, his instinct teaches him to keep out of the way of the tyrant of creation, man. For if he were to be got at, some wealthy glutton would surely devour him, though there were no more in the world. Dryden, in one of his early poems, has this allusion to the phoenix. So when the new-born phoenix first is seen, her feathered subjects all adore their queen. And while she makes her progress through the east, from every grove her numerous trains increased. Each poet of the air her glory sings, and round him the pleased audience clap their wings. Milton, in Paradise Lost, Book 5, compares the angel Raphael descending to the earth to a phoenix. Down thither, prone in flight, he speeds, and through the vast ethereal sky sails between worlds and worlds with steady wing, now on the polar winds, then with quick fan winnows the buxom air, till within soar of towering eagles to all the fowls he seems a phoenix gazed by all as the sole bird, when to enshrine his relics in the sun's bright temple to Egyptian Thebes he flies. The unicorn, from Bulfinch's Mythology. Pliny, the Roman naturalist, out of whose account the unicorn most of the modern unicorns have been described and figured, records it as a very ferocious beast, similar in the rest of its body to a horse, with the head of a deer, the feet of an elephant, the tail of a boar, a deep, bellowing voice, and a single black horn, 2 cubits in length, standing out in the middle of its forehead. He adds that it cannot be taken alive, and some such excuse may have been necessary in those days for not producing the living animal upon the arena of the amphitheater. The unicorn seems to have been a sad puzzle to the hunters who hardly knew how to come at such a valuable piece of game. Some described the horn as movable at the will of the animal, a kind of small sword, in short, with which no hunter who was not exceedingly cunning in fence could have a chance. Others maintained that the animal's strength lay in its horn, and that, when hard pressed in pursuit, it would throw itself from the pinnacle of the highest rocks, horn foremost, so as to pitch upon it, and then quietly march off, not a whit the worse for its fall. But it seems they found out how to circumvent the poor unicorn at last. They discovered that it was a great lover of purity and innocence, so they took the field with a young virgin, who was placed in the unsuspecting admirer's way. When the unicorn spied her, he approached with all reverence, crouched beside her, and laying his head in her lap, fell asleep. The treacherous virgin then gave a signal, and the hunters made in and captured the simple beast. Modern zoologists, disgusted as they well may be with such fables as these, disbelieve generally the existence of the unicorn. Yet there are animals bearing on their heads a bony protuberance more or less like a horn, which may have given rise to the story. The rhinoceros horn, as it is called, is such a protuberance, though it does not exceed a few inches in height, and is far from agreeing with the descriptions of the horn of the unicorn. The nearest approach to a horn in the middle of the forehead is exhibited in the bony protuberance on the forehead of the giraffe, but this is also short and blunt, and is not the only horn of the animal, but a third horn standing in front of the 2 others. In fine, though it would be presumptuous to deny the existence of a one-horned quadruped other than the rhinoceros, it may be safely stated that the insertion of a long and solid horn in the living forehead of a horse-like or deer-like animal is as near an impossibility as anything can be. Bulfinch's Mythology, Pegasus and the Chimera. When Perseus cut off Medusa's head, the blood sinking into the earth produced the winged horse Pegasus. Minerva caught him, and tamed him, and presented him to the Muses. The fountain of Hippocrene, on the Muses' mountain, Helicon, was opened by a kick from his hoof. The Chimera was a fearful monster, breathing fire. The forepart of its body was a compound of the lion and the goat, and the hind part a dragon's. It made great havoc in Lycia, so that the king, Iobates, sought for some hero to destroy it. At that time there arrived at his court a gallant young warrior, whose name was Bellerophon. He brought letters from Proteus, the son-in-law of Iobates, recommending Bellerophon in the warmest terms as an unconquerable hero, but added at the close a request to his father-in-law to put him to death. The reason was that Proteus was jealous of him, suspecting that his wife Annetta looked with too much admiration on the young warrior. From this instance, Bellerophon being unconsciously the bearer of his own death warrant, the expression Bellerophontic letters arose to describe any species of communication which a person is made the bearer of, containing matter prejudicial to himself. Iobates, on pursuing the letters, was puzzled what to do, not willing to violate the claims of hospitality, yet wishing to oblige his son-in-law. A lucky thought occurred to him to send Bellerophon to combat with the Chimera. Bellerophon accepted the proposal, but before proceeding to the combat consulted the soothsayer Polyidus, who advised him to procure, if possible, the horse Pegasus for the conflict. For this purpose, he directed him to pass the night in the temple of Minerva. He did so, and as he slept, Minerva came to him and gave him a golden bridle. When he awoke, the bridle remained in his hand. Minerva also showed him Pegasus drinking at the well of Pyrene, and at the sight of the bridle the winged steed came willingly, and suffered himself to be taken. Bellerophon mounted him, rose with him into the air, soon found the Chimera, and gained an easy victory over the monster. After the conquest of the Chimera, Bellerophon was exposed to further trials and labors by his unfriendly host, but by the aid of Pegasus he triumphed in them all, till at length Iobates, seeing that the hero was a special favorite of the gods, gave him his daughter in marriage, and made him his successor on the throne. At last Bellerophon, by his pride and presumption, drew upon himself the anger of the gods. It is said he even attempted to fly up into heaven on his winged steed, but Jupiter sent a gadfly which stung Pegasus and made him throw his rider, who became lame and blind in consequence. After this, Bellerophon wandered lonely through the alien field, avoiding the paths of men, and died miserably. Milton alludes to Bellerophon in the beginning of the 7th book of Paradise Lost. Descend from heaven, Urana, by that name, if rightly thou art called, whose voice divine, following above the Olympian hill I soar, above the flight of Pegasean wing. Upled by thee, into the heaven of heavens I have presumed, an earthly guest, and drawn imperial air. Thy tempering, with like safety guided down, return me to my native element, lest from this flying steed, unreined, as once Bellerophon, though from a lower sphere, dismounted on the Elean field I fall, erroneous, there to wander, and forlorn. Young, in his Night Thoughts, speaking of the skeptic, says, He whose blind thought futurity denies, unconscious bears, Bellerophon, like thee. His own indictment he condemns himself, who reads his bosom reads immortal life, or nature there imposing on her sons, has written fables, man was made a lie. Pegasus, being the horse of the Muses, has always been at the service of the poets. Schiller tells a pretty story of his having been sold by a needy poet and put to the cart and plough. He was not fit for such service, and his clownish master could make nothing of him. But a youth stepped forth, and asked leave to try him. As soon as he was seated on the back of the horse, which had appeared at first vicious, and afterwards spirit-broken, rose, kingly, a spirit, a god, unfolded the splendor of his wings, and soared towards heaven. Our own poet Longfellow also records an adventure of this famous steed and his Pegasus in Pound. Shakespeare alludes to Pegasus in Henry IV, where Vernon describes Prince Henry. I saw young Henry with his beaver on, his cuishes on his thighs, gallantly armed, rise from the ground like feathered Mercury, and vaulted with such ease into his seat, as if an angel dropped down from the clouds, to turn and wind a fiery Pegasus, and witch the world with noble horsemanship. The Griffin, or Griffin, from Bulfinch's Mythology. The Griffin is a monster with the body of a lion, the head and wings of an eagle, and back covered with feathers. Like birds it builds its nest, and instead of an egg, lays an agate therein. It has long claws and talons of such a size that the people of that country make them into drinking cups. India was assigned as the native country of the griffins. They found gold in the mountains, and built their nests of it, for which reason their nests were very tempting to the hunters, and they were forced to keep vigilant guard over them. Their instinct led them to know where buried treasures lay, and they did their best to keep plunderers at a distance. The Arimaspians, among whom the griffins flourished, were a one-eyed people of Scythia. Milton borrows a simile from the griffins. Paradise Lost, Book 2. As when a griffin through the wilderness with winged course, o'er hill and moory dale, pursues the Arimaspian, who by stealth, hath from his wakeful custody purloined his guarded gold, etc.